Welcome back to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Bede Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. When last we spoke with today's guest on this podcast, Ontario's legal gambling market was doing just fine, thank you. There was lots of talk about regulated open sports betting and iGaming coming to Alberta with little action. Prediction markets were just a tiny part of the industry lingo, and there was the usual bit of M&A activity happening within the industry. On the heels of the Ontario market's fourth birthday, the conversation is very different, however. So it's perfect timing to say hello once again to advisor, board member, investor, entrepreneur, savant, ambassador, and principal of Avenue H Capital, Benjie Cherniak. Benjie, welcome back to the podcast. It's been far, far too long.
Yeah, it has, Steve. I can't believe it's been close to a year and a half since we've caught up. And I'm not sure when I've last seen you in person, but I'll take what I can get and see you here on the pod. Good enough.
Right back at you, Benjie. And before we hit the publish button, you mentioned that you're in Miami and you're just fresh off having lunch with the family Levy. So I'm sure that's got the creative juices flowing to do this podcast.
Yeah, we discussed a multitude of topics, but mostly we're just friends and catching up over lunch. Those guys spend the winters down here, John and Aubrey and Noah, and I think Benjie would be back in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, your neck of the woods. But I do spend the winters down here in Miami, although we'll be in Toronto a fair bit this summer. So hopefully we'll be able to catch up in person then.
Oh, good. Well, hopefully that includes the SBC Summit Canada in May and getting some time with you then.
It might be a bit after that. I'll see if I can make it for that. I know it's a phenomenal show, and the Canadian gaming folks alongside SBC and Paul Burns do an incredible job at that one. So I have it earmarked, but I'm not sure if I can make it that week. We'll see.
Hey, I want to start, Benjie. We both mentioned it's been a while since we caught up in this format. I'm just wondering, what are you up to these days?
I'd say more of the same. It's not a very exciting answer or a sexy answer, so to speak, but really since my time of doing my own thing or the Don Best days and selling that company and moving on, I guess we're probably 5-6 years since that moment now. And that's kind of right around the time that I met you and began having conversations with you. And what I said to you then and I would say to you now is I don't really know how strategic I am in terms of how I position myself in this industry. I take on projects that I want to take on because I think that they'll be fun with people that I want to work with and that I think could potentially be lucrative. And that's still the case. So whether it's advisory or whether it's investment or whether it's a bit of consulting or sitting on some boards, I'm just kind of being very selective. I'm probably more selective now than I was back then in terms of what I want to get involved in, so as to ensure that I'm optimizing what I do and what I'm involved in while also protecting my time.
Are you seeing any change? You've been helping out startups for a while now. Have you seen any change in kind of the types of startups that are getting into the gaming industry? Like, has artificial intelligence had any impact on that? Is there a change in the demographics of people starting companies in the gaming industry? Have you seen any differences?
It's a good question. I don't know that I put that much thought into it, to be honest, but certainly AI is having its impact as it is on every industry. And, look, in the world of AI, it's hard to be everything to everyone. But I think that the companies that come in, there's two ways to go about it. You could just utilize AI. I'm seeing it's interesting. I'm seeing decks now from founders, and I'll get on a call with them and say, "Tell me about your team." And they're like, "I am the team, me and AI." You can do so much more with so few resources, given the capacity of AI. And I think it's a lot easier for a new company, a startup, to build that into their DNA than an existing behemoth of a company that's been in this industry for 10 or 20 years. And I think that's applicable for any industry, not just our industry. But, the companies that come in that are either AI driven in terms of their DNA and how they approach what problem they're trying to solve, or that are providing some form of AI driven service, whether it's AI driven pricing or voice over AI or AI customer service or agentic agents. The more narrow you are in terms of the problem you're trying to solve, at least initially, I think the better chances for success for those startups in the space. And I think that there's some that are coming in that are really interesting right now.
I also wonder, just given the current economic landscape in which we live, if how large of impact, if any, that's having around M&A.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Just given the current economic landscape, not just in North America, Benjie, but around the world, I just wonder, is that having any kind of an impact on companies or people like yourself, being interested in acquiring a company or mergers?
I don't know if AI itself is the driver of M&A and driver of mergers. I think those are driven primarily by unit economics. Potentially on the merger side, if you're a company that can bring in a group that has stronger AI aptitude than you have, then that becomes potentially interesting in what they can bring to your organization. But I think it's a double-edged sword. As I said earlier, I think a lot of these startups have AI in the DNA of what they do, and a lot of the behemoths are trying to utilize AI to recreate how they do things. I think it's easier to do it from scratch than to bring it into existing DNA, but everyone's trying.
Benjie, going back to your time at Don Best and what's happened with your life since then, I just wonder, is there anything that's caught your eye in terms of the evolution of sports data and technology? Like, is there something that's really cool that you wish you'd been able to do during your early years in the gaming industry?
I don't know if I look back at it in that way. What I would say is one of the theses that I had early on that I think is holding true and will continue to hold true moving forward is that when sports betting was legalized and gaming was legalized in select states in the US going back to PASPA repeal, you might recall me saying that the way I kind of viewed this was, you've got regulated gaming in one silo and you've got all these other buckets of real money gaming alongside it. And I think that held true then. I think it holds true now. I don't view the real money gaming movement as any one thing. I view it as an emerging dynamic and a converging dynamic of everything from the regulated casino and sports betting that we see in the US and Canada. And I'm talking more about the North American market now, alongside, the picks businesses and the fantasy businesses. And obviously, since you and I have spoken, you now have that gargantuan Prize Picks exit, which is a grand slam of a result for everyone involved there. And kudos to them, alongside the sweeps businesses, which are facing their challenges now with the Californias and everything else. But we're still seeing some areas of growth within that. And, alongside that, of course, we'll talk about the emergence of prediction markets. And we can go on and on and on. Real money gaming is no one thing. It's all of these things combined when you talk about the North American market. And, the gray markets continue to thrive. The illegal, quote unquote, sports betting that's done in the back channels of countries abroad. It hasn't gone away. It's still there. So it's, as you configure this entire piece of the puzzle, the one thing that I will say is that, the regulatory schemes, or schemes might be the wrong word, the regulatory framework that has been set up in the US on a state-by-state basis. Each state will do the best they can within the realities of what they're trying to put forward, but it's inefficient. It's inefficient for operators. 6 years or 7 years later, we're seeing there's a couple of winners. There were a whole lot of losers and a number that are still treading water. And then you've got some that are only in this because they've got their bricks and mortars driving the casino or driving the iGaming side of it. But regulated gaming in the US is a tough business and not a great business. And the regulatory schemes, I guess I use that word again, but the regulatory dynamics that surround it continue to make it very, very challenging, which is all the reason why some of these other components of real money gaming become all that attractive to entrepreneurs.
That seems to be happening in the UK, Benjie, where the 40% tax rate has just gone into effect, which I think is a doubling of the previous tax rate. And saw some coverage this week, the week we record this interview, that the belief that small and mid-market operators were gonna bite the dust, I guess, for lack of a better word, or that those places were pulling out of the UK.
There's no better way to get folks to bite the dust and to encourage an illegal gaming market than doubling taxes. It's a surefire route to chaos and to lack of success and to achieving the exact opposite of what you're trying to achieve. Unless it's to me, it's asinine, but it is what it is.
Hey, you raised a really interesting point talking about the gray market, Benji, and I think there's a perception, and again, there was an article in on CBC News's website last week in the news that we highlighted in the newsletter about the angst over advertising in Ontario and across Canada, and efforts by the Senate and now Parliament to pass a bill to create a national framework for sports betting advertising. I think there's a feeling out there by a lot of people that if you put a ban on advertising and you cut back on regulated operators, that's going to solve gambling addiction and problem gambling. And I think, you've obviously got a really good, pardon the bad pun, a good handle on this, but the Canadian Gaming Association has done studies that show that there's still a very significant number of gamblers in British Columbia and Alberta and other parts of the country that are playing in the gray market.
Yeah. Look, I'm not an expert on those specific dynamics. What I will say is, when this thing got going in Ontario 4 years ago, you couldn't watch a Calgary Flames or Maple Leafs or Canucks game without being just absolutely bombarded with advertisements, and all those companies were flush with cash to spend in the Canadian marketplace, as they were initially in the States and the US, and trying to buy their market share. And that slowed down to some extent right now. But I think that evaluating what the right cadence is and what's permissible as it pertains to ads and who these ads target, it has its merits, right? And I also think that as an industry, it's important that in any jurisdiction, be it in Ontario or soon to be Alberta or other, that we police ourselves to the best of our abilities. And we have responsible gaming initiatives, and we have some really, really good people on both sides of the border, as well as globally, that believe in this industry and believe in the integrity of it, as they should, and believe that we as operators should all act responsibly. And I think that even within some of the non-regulated verticals, you've got some really good advocates that want to do things the right way, and those are the mentalities that should prevail. But there's no easy answers to any of it, and it'll be talked about in the years ahead.
Is your iGaming platform ready for Alberta? Bede Gaming is ready to support your new market entry with a SOC 2 compliant platform, multi-tenant infrastructure model, and unlimited configurability. Future-proof your iGaming performance today with a solid foundation for your next province. Bede Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at bedegaming.com. Hey, I know you don't spend a lot of time in Canada these days, but I do wonder if you have any thoughts. We just Ontario just recognized, I guess, its 4th birthday launching the open sports betting and iGaming market here. And any observations or thoughts on what you've seen over the past 4 years here?
Well, first of all, I will correct you. I do spend a fair bit of time in Canada. I just try to avoid it in the winter months for obvious reasons. But putting that aside, Look, the 4-year anniversary of Ontario, if we take a big picture approach and take a look at Ontario, they've gotten a whole lot more right than they have wrong. And the proof is in the pudding. On a pound per pound basis, I don't know what the exact metrics are, but there aren't many markets in North America or globally that are better pound for pound markets than Ontario has been. And if you come into that market, you see it with companies like Bede, who have come in and really built a strong foothold and a strong business in really Ontario only. And I imagine now expanding into Alberta as well. And there's just one example. But Ontario has proven to be a strong market. I think if you're opening up other markets in Canada, you don't need to recreate the wheel. You just need to take a look at what Ontario has done. Wash, rinse, repeat, maybe tweak a little bit based on areas that you think can be improved upon. And, what a phenomenal success story overall the Ontario market has been, despite any of the negative news articles and naysayers.
Based on your experience, would you have any advice for an operator who's going to go to Alberta, who's currently operating in Ontario, where, I think there was some criticism in Ontario at the beginning that operators were, kind of bringing their American influence to Ontario and didn't recognize that there were nuances and there were differences. And I think there was a shift in that. But is any advice you would give to operators going into Alberta?
I think I would double down on what you just said. Like, Ontario is the most American province in Canada, but it's still Canada, and you got to Canadianize what you're doing within reason, right? And I think Alberta would be a doubling down of that. I think Alberta is a lot more Canadian even than Ontario is. I mean, maybe that's an unfair statement, but my point being that just geographically and the way that some of the bigger cities there are positioned in Calgary and Edmonton versus Toronto as an example, the more that I think you can personalize that to what that community is all about and what those buyers are consuming, and in terms of penetrating the types of partners within that province that will resonate with the populace there. I think it's not just as simple as wash, rinse, repeat from what we're doing in Ontario. I think there's a huge component of that because what we've done in Ontario has worked really well for a number of operators, but you still want to ensure that you're gearing that target offering to what the Alberta consumers like to consume.
I spoke with a few people who suggested that the Alberta launch may be the catalyst to more provinces following suit. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that as it pertains to British Columbia. I would think that they're not going to be that far behind and open up from a monopoly to something that allows some more operators to play ball within the province. I would go the other way as it pertains to the next big guy, which would be Quebec. I see no real signs of movement there. And then you would think that some of the guys in between following British Columbia would likely follow suit. I'm hopeful that it won't take as long for some of the other dominoes to fall as it took for Alberta to fall after Ontario came to fruition. But I think it just took Alberta also a little bit longer to get their framework in place. And look, these aren't easy things, and these aren't easy decisions, and the regulatory aspects of it, Alberta has been enthusiastic about it. It's just taken a little bit longer than they would have liked to get over the hump. But they're there, and July is around the corner. I think it's an exciting time for a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of operators that are in Ontario that will go into Alberta. I think we'll also see some Alberta native operators that will come in and be specific to that province. And do I think that those can be grand slam businesses? I don't think they need to be. I think they just need to focus on what they do well. So I'd like to think that some of the other provinces will fall. Hopefully it can happen a bit quicker than we saw with Alberta. But outside of British Columbia, I don't think anything is all that imminent. And as I said, I think Quebec is light years away.
You'll have better insight than I do into this, but just related to British Columbia, I've said for a while now, it just feels like there's there's quite a significant gaming industry there already in terms of suppliers and technology companies and that. Are you surprised that it has taken BC so long, and that in fact that maybe it wasn't a leader in launching regulated market?
I don't think the fact that there's a number of companies with offices there and that there's a huge talent pool there operationally was the case long before we had regulation in the U.S. And Vancouver's always been a little bit of a hotbed, even historically more so than Ontario. Of course, Ontario now has a whole bunch of great startups and great people in the space. Am I surprised? I would have thought that all of Canada would have happened a bit quicker than it has. So within that framework, I'd go with yes. But it was pretty evident fairly early on that Alberta would be the second mover, and that's what's happening. So hopefully British Columbia's relatively quickly thereafter, but I'm not surprised that they didn't get ahead of Alberta, if that's what you're asking.
And then just in terms of Quebec, Benjamin, you're very familiar with the province. Why do you think that province was so resistant, or why if there ever is a regulated market, it'll take a long time to get there?
I think look, Quebec as a province is sometimes a little bit of a mind of its own. We've seen it, you look at the history of the province and all of the referendums and the desire to have a little bit of separation in some ways from the rest of Canada. There's the language piece of it. But I think they're seemingly content with the current structure with Lotto Quebec and where they sit in the ecosystem. And, again, I'm not having specific conversations with any of the regulators there, But anything that I've seen, read, and back channeled is that there's really no movement there at all. And I hope I'm wrong at everything that I'm saying on that, but it doesn't seem to be the case from everything that I've discussed.
I want to spend a few minutes talking about the U.S. and you mentioned sweepstakes at the beginning of the interview, and it's like you almost never hear sweepstakes anymore. And then 7 months ago, it seemed like every week we were covering sweepstakes in the newsletter. I mean, these days it's prediction markets. Just real simple. What are your thoughts on prediction markets, and do they have a place within the gambling industry?
I mean, they certainly seem to right now, don't they? They're certainly all the rage. And when you look at the valuations of some of the leaders at I don't know, 19 and 22 billion or whatever the numbers are, they've doubled and tripled almost on an annual basis over the last couple of years. Look, it reminds me a whole lot of the sports betting gold rush back in 2018, back in 2019, where everyone wanted to get in. The valuations were sky high. All the European companies were coming into the US, and we're now 6 or 7 years later, and the majority of the folks that made those efforts have taken their ball and gone home. Will it be the same thing in prediction markets? I hope not. There's so much smart money and influential capital right now invested significantly into the prediction market space, alongside support currently from the highest powers in the US, all the way up to almost the president's family, if you will. It's hard to envision over the short term that this is going away. What will happen in 3 or 4 years from now when there's a regime change? That will be interesting. Ultimately, I think for some of this stuff to be overturned, it's going to need to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And will the Supreme Court have the appetite to look at this on behalf of select states? Probably they will. We had the New Jersey ruling that came out a couple of days ago. I'm sure that will get resurfaced in some capacity, but was a very favorable result for the prediction markets and Kalshi and the industry as a whole. And look, my view has always been we shouldn't be fighting these things, right? This is the natural evolution. It's what the public wants. We really should be finding a way to regulate these things. And I would say the same for the fantasy and picks business. I would say the same in some capacity for sweeps. In my view, we should be finding a way to make these things work. We should be finding a way to embrace innovation on both sides of the border. And, look, it's an interesting dynamic when you talk about the Canadian marketplace. And obviously your podcast and newsletter is Canadian centric, as it should be. And right now it seems to be a no-go in Canada, whereas it seems to be a go in the US. I think that if you fast forward X years from now, if prediction markets achieves true mainstream acceptance in the US and a more regulatory acceptance than there is today, to the point that we're no longer really combating it, it's a given that it'll make its way into Canada over time. It's just going to require the right group with the right structure, with the right financing and the right political connections, approaching this in a diligent and a transparent way, and working with regulators to try to find a way to make it work versus finding a way to not make it work. So I know that in 2026, the prediction market topic is a dead one in Canada. I like the tune, dude. Maybe it will be in 2027 as well, but at some point, this is, in my view, to the extent that we see mainstreaming of it in the US, it'll make its way into Canada as well, I think.
I mean, this may be getting too deep into the weeds, but I just wonder, if prediction markets are going to be a long-term thing, I just wonder if there has to be some kind of a restructuring of the regulatory setup where, right now we have gaming commissions kind of oversee the sports betting and gaming industries in the U.S. states. We've got the CFTC overseeing prediction markets, and you mentioned sweepstakes and fantasy. You wonder if there has to be a dramatic way of the way legal gambling is set up in the U.S. and eventually Canada.
I don't think anything dramatic will happen short term. Could prediction markets ultimately be a catalyst that leads to a national regulatory mechanic within the US, that would be a phenomenal development in my mind if it were to come to pass. It's hard to see that anytime soon, just given that, you know, the states have too much power and would have a negative view of that. But long term, who knows?
Hey, Benji, before I let you go, I just want to give you a chance to give a shout out. I mean, you get to spend a lot of time with a lot of smart people, but especially smart young people around the startups. And for our audience, are there some companies or some people that you would recommend keeping tabs on right now? Young companies that are, you know, kicking derriere in this market, or guys that you're having conversation with, or companies that are producing products that you're really keen on?
There's a lot of them. I'm almost hesitant to do it just because I start mentioning one company and forgetting another company, but there's so many young entrepreneurs of all ages that are shooting their shots and taking their swings. One of the challenges for me, Steve, is there's so many of them. They're all so articulate. They all view, especially some of the ones that are up and coming, view the opportunity with a clear conscience in terms of I'm set in my ways, you're set in your ways to a certain extent. Like, we're not going to change who we are. But some of these young up and comers view the opportunity very differently. You know, I think back 10 years ago to when like a guy like a Joey Levy was getting going, or a Justin Park, right? And these guys, or an Adam Wexler, and they came in with ideas of how they can change things in our space. And there's so many people like that today that are 10 years younger than those guys that, you know, 7 or 8 years ago were sitting in their parents' basements thinking of ways in which they can recreate the space. And I don't know, I'm hesitant to get into saying names of specifics, but there's a lot of innovation in terms of all aspects of our space, how we approach B2C. You know, you look at some of these guys like the Optic Odds and OddsJam guys, and, you know, the changes that they've made in terms of how we present B2B data. It's just really exciting to watch. And I think one category to keep a close eye on is content creation, and the role that influencers are going to continue to make in our space, and really finding that balance between, you know, the influencers and content creators that are gaming centric, the operators, social media, and bringing that together into experiences that make sense. I think we're seeing some interesting companies along those lines. I'm involved with one, but I'll keep it nameless for the time being. So again, I'm even wearing the shirt here of a company called Hot Takes. So you probably know the guys there. They're Toronto guys doing some really cool stuff on the affiliate side. And affiliate is facing us challenges now, but all that will get reinvented as well. There's a lot of reasons to be bullish on this space and bullish on this industry and bullish on the entrepreneurship. You know, look, I'm trying to protect my time. I get so much outreach from great entrepreneurs that, you know, they want capital or they want some assistance. And, you know, I can't get with all of them every time. I wish that I could. But I think that the industry, as we look at the future of it, is in really good hands and in great shape.
Hey, that's a pretty good answer for not wanting to put forward some companies, Benji. But I want to reframe it a little bit. Maybe just ask, are you seeing different types of people or different types of ideas than you did 10 years ago in terms like, are you seeing more women who are involved in startups, or are you seeing there a certain area around technology or innovation or data, or you mentioned content creation? Are there other areas that we weren't seeing in this industry 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, the content, I think I've touched on some of these themes. The content creation would for sure be one. The emergence of technology and how technology can be utilized to drive pricing is, I think, a really interesting area that we're seeing now, both from incumbents and new entrants. You know, look, there's always been some phenomenal women entrepreneurs in our space. There always will be. I think that, you know, when it comes to the investment side of it and the M&A side, everyone's equal, and may the best woman, man, person, cat, or whatever win. It's an open dialogue, and entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship. So I think maybe it's because I'm getting older. What strikes me is how young some of these people are, right? And they're coming in with some. Again, you meet a founder just one or two of them, and they're using AI and Claude to build stuff that used to require teams of 10 or 20. And then you look at some of the behemoth companies that have 1,000 employees, doing what can be done with 15 people in a startup, and it's or less than that. And it's really, it's incredible to see where the headspace of some of these people. But, the flip side of that is I still think that a lot of folks are coming out and bringing ideas forward and, not recognizing some of the TAM limitations that are inherent in our space. If you're going B2C, you can take a big swing. On the B2B side, I think there are some inherent TAM limitations, be it casino or sports or prediction markets. So I think that some of these newcomers would be wise to adhere to learning from the past and ensuring that they keep bootstrap as long as you can, keep the valuations tight, and grow from there. Yeah, I had a piece of advice for the next generation.
Perfect. I had one last question, but I think you've answered over the last half hour plus. And I was going to ask you if you're still excited about this industry, but I don't know if I need an answer from you on that.
No, I'm super excited about the space. I think, as I just said earlier, I think that the next generation of entrepreneurs is going to be the best generation of entrepreneurs. And I think that there's a whole lot of growth ahead. I think the best is yet to come. I just think that how we define gaming is going to continue to be an evolving dynamic. You look at, I like what, to be honest, I mentioned Joey Levy. I like what Better's doing with the Super App. And now is it FanDuel that announced the Super App or DraftKings? I like that concept. You've got, regulated gaming, and you've got your prediction markets, and you've got your horse slots, and you've got your arcade games all within one experience, and you can drive people from one to the other. And that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
That is Benjie Cherniak, the principal of Avenue H Capital. Hey, Benjie, always these podcasts for you tend to be like a Gatling gun effect of covering a lot of topics in a very short period of time. But as always, you're so insightful, you're so passionate. And my only regret is that we only do this it seems like every 18 months or so. So I need to fix that.
Well, if it takes 18 months till the next one, with best blessings, maybe have a Blue Jays World Series championship between now and then. We came close between our last two podcasts. Maybe we'll get it between the next two.
That's a good idea. Maybe we do this podcast from a World Series game if there's going to be another one in Toronto.
I'll come down for that. Count me in. If the Jays are in the World Series, I will come to town, head to a game, and join you for a podcast in person in the studio. Book it. All right. Deal.
On a more serious note, Benjie, always appreciate you taking the time to chat, and wish you well with the rest of your stay in the U.S. And yeah, look forward to seeing you this summer in Toronto.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. Love what you're doing. Always have.
Great. Thanks, Benjie. That's Benjie Cherniak, and that is it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada Show presented by Bede Gaming. As always, you can find the podcast on all the various podcast apps. You can also watch my conversation with Benjie on the Gaming News Canada YouTube channel. Again, thank you so much to our loyal listeners and watchers for your support of Gaming News Canada, and we will see everybody again very soon.